All right, so this is Ready for High School Math, lesson 1.4 on analyzing patterns and graphs. So this lesson is going to be an introduction into some different visual representations of data that we might see. Okay, so some of these representations will include graphs, tables, equations, mappings. Okay, so a lot of this stuff might be a little bit unfamiliar to you. Okay, so just hold on with me, just hang on, and we're going to go through and I'm going to try my best to explain each and every little thing we have in here. Okay, so the first kind of visual representation that we're going to see is this thing known as a number line. Okay, so a number line is probably something that we are a little bit more familiar with it. Okay, so a number line is going to be a visual representation of the order of numbers in a real number system. Okay, so basically, as we kind of imagine with numbers, okay, so there's always going to be a point that starts at 0, and anything to the left of 0 is always going to be a negative number, and we see this little arrowhead, so our little number line cuts off at -4, but that arrow is to imply that the numbers keep getting farther and farther negative as we go this way. Likewise, anything to the right of 0 will be positive. So again, the positive numbers don't stop at 7, okay? They keep on extending farther and farther to the right. So now using this number line, we're going to answer a couple of questions right here. So number one, what is the smallest coordinate graphed on this number line? So keep in mind, the smallest coordinate, that also means the number with the smallest numeric value. So basically, we're going to be going as far left as we can, because as we keep going farther and farther left, the values get less and less and less. They get smaller and smaller and smaller. So the farthest left value that we have is at point A. Okay, point A is -4, and that's going to be the smallest coordinate that we have graphed here. Okay, next up, what is the absolute value of B? Okay, so remember that little bar sign right there, that is going to be absolute value. And absolute value tells me how far a number is away from 0. Okay, well, point B is at -2. So really the question we're answering is, what is absolute value of -2? How far away is -2 from 0? Okay, well, there's two ways we can think about this. Either one, absolute value is always going to be the positive version of whatever is inside of the bars, or we could even just count it out up here on the number line. Okay, so on the number line, if I start at -2, to get to 0, I have to go to the right 1, 2. So the absolute value of B will just be 2. Okay, next up, which coordinates are opposites? Okay, so two numbers that are opposites are equal distance away from 0. They're the same distance away from 0. So we need to find 2 points up here that are both the same distance away from 0. Okay, so let's start with point A. So point A is 1, 2, 3, 4 away from 0. So if I want to see if its opposite is also one of these other points, then I need to go 4 away from 0 in the other direction. 1, 2, 3, 4. So since there's not a point on +4, then that means that the opposite of -4 is implied. All right, so let's try B. 1, 2, 1, 2. So you notice B is 2 away from 0, and D is 2 away from 0. So because B and D are both equal distance away from 0 on this number line, we would consider those numbers to be opposites, -2 and 2. All right, lastly, we'll do which coordinate represents the square root of -9. So in order for us to understand where that number is, we need to understand what the square root of 9 is. Okay, so if you have your calculator, the way to type in that square root, you're going to hit the second button, and then you're going to hit this button right here, x squared. Make sure you hit second, though, because when you hit second x squared, you're going to get a square root sign with a little blinking box. Okay, so then to get square root of 9, we'll type in 9 into that box, and then we'll hit this right arrow to exit out of the square root, and then we hit enter. So the square root of 9 is the same thing as 3. So basically, we're looking for which coordinate is at +3. Well, we look right here. E is at +3. So that is going to be our coordinate. All right, so now we come over here. Write the inequality that correctly compares coordinates below. Okay, so with inequality symbols, okay, so we have equal symbols, okay, so this is an equal symbol or an equality symbol. But when we're talking about things that are not equal to each other, we're going to have two main ideas behind this, okay? Either we're going to be looking at this symbol, which is greater than, and this symbol, which states something is less than another thing, okay? So when we're talking about write the inequality, we're going to be thinking about one of these two symbols, all right? So we're looking to compare point B and point E. So basically, is point B greater than or less than point E? Well, let's look up here. We know that point B is -2, and we know that point E is at 3. So the question is -2 greater than or less than 3? Well, think of it this way. The options are I take $2 away from you, or I give you $3. Which one seems to be the better? Which one seems to be the greater benefit to you? And that's going to be if you receive 3. So -2 is going to be less than 3. Okay? The little mouth right here for the inequality symbol is always going to eat the bigger number because 3 is a bigger number. It is farther to the right on the number line. So that's going to mean that we're going to want the 3. So -2 is less than 3. Okay, so now this time we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to have a little bit more work involved because we need to plug in these values and also keep the absolute value in mind. Okay, so if I plug in, anytime I plug numbers in, we always need to put it in parentheses first just to be careful. So the absolute value of -4, that's A, minus B, which is 2. And then over here, the absolute value of B, which is -2, minus the absolute value of E, which is 3. All right, so over here, we've got the absolute value of -4 minus 2. So if we work that stuff out in the middle, so to type that in, so whenever you type in a negative number, you always want to hit this bottom, okay? Don't hit the minus sign, hit the negative sign before we get started. Okay, so that's going to be -4. Then you can do -2. And so we get -6, but we're still in that absolute value. So we got the absolute value of -6. Now over here, we got the absolute value of -2. So remember, absolute value is always going to turn out the positive version of whatever number is inside here. So the positive version of -2 will just be +2 minus, so absolute value of 3, that's just going to be 3. All right, so now back over here. Absolute value of -6, that's just going to give me the positive version of that number, which is 6. And then 2 minus 3 will give me -1. So now the question is 6 greater than or less than -1? The answer is it is greater than. It's farther to the right on the number line. All right, let's look at number 2. All right, so once again, now we've got another number line. This time, they want us to plot these points, though. They want us to plot these points, okay? So first up, we are given these numbers right here, square root of 25, pi, 36 to the 1/2 power, square root of 2, and 27 to the 1/3 power, okay? And they want us to plot each of these onto this number line, okay? Now, right off the bat, we may not know what any of these numbers are because as you can see, we don't have anywhere with 25, we don't have pi, we don't have 36. We have a 2, but 2 is different from square root of 2, so that may not be in the same place. And we don't have a 27 on here, okay? So first things first, we're just going to go through and we're going to figure out what each of these values is in the calculator, okay? So we start with the first one, which is square root of 25. So to get that squared button, you'll hit second, and you hit this x squared button right there. Type in 25, hit the right arrow, and we get 5. So square root of 25 is just the same thing as 5. So we're going to put a dot, and we'll mark that as square root of 25. Okay, next thing, pi. So to get pi, what you want to do, you want to hit the second button, and then you want to hit this little house top button. This is what we normally use for exponents. But when we hit second and then hit this button, it's going to give us the character pi. All right, so we see pi's got a long decimal, but we can approximate it to be about 3.14. So remember, if we're looking for 3.14, so if it's bigger than 3 but less than 4, that's what we're looking at. So it's going to be in this range. So keep in mind that when we go from 3 to 4, we have 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, all the way to 3.9. So about halfway here would be about 3.5. And since 3.5 is still bigger than 3.1, we want to be closer to that 3. So if we try to go maybe a quarter of the way, that'd be 3.25. But that's still bigger than what we want. So we're going to be just barely away from 3. And that's going to be where we approximate pi to be at. All right, next up, we have 36 to the 1/2 power. So we'll do 36. Now we're going to come back to this little button right here, but we're not going to hit second. We're instead just going to hit it, by itself, and that's going to give us an exponent. And so now to get the 1/2 power, we're just going to type it in as 1 divided by 2 and hit the right arrow again, hit enter. And so we see that 36 to the 1/2 power is just 6. So we'll mark that. All right, next up we have the square root of 2. Okay, so square root of 2, we'll hit second and then the x squared button, which will give us the square root. Type in 2, hit the right arrow. And so again, this one was a decimal, so we're going to approximate it. So 1.4. All right, so if we got 1.4, that's going to be in between 1 and 2. Okay, so remember, halfway would be about 1.5. 1.4 is a little bit smaller than 1.5. So we're going to be just under halfway between 1 and 2. And that's going to be our root 2. All right, and then lastly, we have 27 to the 1/3 power. So we'll do it similar to 36 to the 1/2 power. 27, exponent button, 1/3, right arrow, hit enter, and we get 3. Okay, so that one is going to be 27 to the 1/3, just a little bit smaller than pi. All right, so now we ask ourselves, which of these has the largest value? Okay, so basically, which one is the farthest to the right? And that is going to be this point right here, which is 36 to the 1/2 power. And which of these has the smallest value? Well, that is going to be root 2. It is the one to the farthest left. All right, so next up, how many values are in the interval 2 less than or equal to x less than or equal to 5? So when we talk about an interval, we're talking about a certain group of numbers. How many of these points will belong in that certain group of numbers? Okay, now there's one key thing to notice here, is that these signs that we've got right here. Okay, so if you notice, they look a little, these are inequality signs, but they look a little bit different to what we were dealing with up here because they have that little extra line. Okay, so when we get into intervals, basically, if we have this little extra line down here, this will represent less than or equal to. Okay, that being that in this situation, we can have things that are equal to 2 and 5, or anything that is in between 2 or 5. Okay, so basically what we're going to do is we are going to focus in on a portion of this number line. And we are going to see how many points are in this little portion of the number line. And if there's any points that are directly on our border, so if anything is directly on top of 2 or directly on top of 5, we will count that point as well. So inside this little group, we've got 27 to the 1/3, pi, and then directly on the border, square root of 25. So we're going to count all 3 of those. All right, next up, which are irrational numbers? Okay, so to figure out if a number is irrational, remember, if a number is rational, then that means that it can be written as a fraction. So if it's irrational, it means it cannot be written as a fraction. So let's go through and let's check these one more time, okay? So to know if a number is rational, it needs to be written as a fraction or at least come out as a nice round number, okay? So we'll start with the first one. We have square root of 25, so that is 5. So that number is rational, okay? So that one is a good number for us. Okay, next up we had pi. So pi initially gives us that decimal. So now to check if it can be rational, we're going to hit math, enter, enter. And so you see it gave us that decimal again. So because it gave us that decimal again, means this number cannot be written as a fraction, and thus this number will be irrational. So pi is one of our irrational numbers. All right, next up we have 36 to the 1/2 power. And that's going to give me 6. So 6 is a rational number, so we'll be good there. So we don't have to count it. Next up, we have square root of 2. So again, it gives us that decimal. So just to check, math, enter, enter. And so again, did not give us a fraction. So that means the square root of 2 is also going to be irrational. And then we finish it out with 27 to the 1/3 power. And so we get 3. So 3 is also a rational number. So our 2 irrational numbers will be pi and root 2. And I will pick up this lesson in part 2 of the next video.